going from the broad to the specific, and this presentation I call the porn-free family. I guess what I'm essentially doing is identifying pornography as, in some point, maybe the primary culprit in this digital world, or the thing that most concerns parents. My thought being, if you get this right, chances are you're getting right a lot of the other things that are along the way. If you're guarding your children from seeing pornography, if you're helping them monitor their devices and use their devices in such a way that they're avoiding this, chances are along the way you're taking care of some of the other concerns as well. As I talk to families, I know that for many of them, this really is their foremost concern as it comes to their children, as it comes to raising their children well, at least as it pertains to all of these new technologies. So, one of the weird realities of my life is I get to travel all over the world talking about something I hate, which is pornography. I wrote a book. One of the first books I wrote was about pornography, Sexual Detox, a guide for guys who are sick of porn. It's at the back there. And that book gave me many opportunities to travel. So I got invited to churches in, I think, at least 4 different continents to go there and to conferences to speak about this thing. And I think over that time I've seen just about all you can see. There's not much that shocks me or surprises me anymore as I engage with people and talk to people. The amount of people I've seen who have been really destroyed by pornography, the amount of families I've seen that have been fractured by it. It's sad, it's tragic. Of course, it hasn't all been bad. I've met some people who have seen great victory, met people who have done great work in this field. So it's been an interesting journey over the past, maybe it's been 7 or 8 years I've been doing that. So I talk about now the porn-free family. So originally I was going around just talking about pornography and why people should be aware of it and flee it, and giving people counsel to overcome it. I've since sort of transitioned into talking more about this kind of subject, the porn-free family, which is really just a means to discuss all of these problems that have come our way through the internet. Again, porn might be the most obvious, but there's many others as well. But largely the solutions are largely the same. I think most parents are aware of this. People are very aware of some of these problems that come, but I think most parents aren't so aware of what to do about it, and certainly don't feel confident. What do I actually do about it? I mean, I know that my children are asking for these devices. I know that there's many benefits that come this way. I know that really part of my parenting is to help my children use these things well. I just don't really know what to do about it. And so what I want to do today is just lay out a plan that you can take to your family and implement in your family, and it'll actually work. Doesn't mean it's going to completely protect everyone from everything, but it's a plan. It's something you put in place like so much else in your family. You put it in place and trust that over time it will work, that it will be a critical part of raising children in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. There's some people out there who are on the front lines of pornography, really fighting it through legislation and such things. I'm all for that. I know some of them. Good folk. My emphasis is different. I'm fighting for prevention, for training, and then for recovery from the problems that come with pornography. I do think we're hitting an interesting point. This whole Me Too movement and everything else, I think, is opening people's eyes to some of the massive contradictions in our society, and one of those is pornography, that we're claiming to want to protect women, claiming to want to allow people to be sexually protected and all of that, and yet pornography is absolutely exploitation. Pornography is vulgar and terrible, and I'm hoping that societally, I'm fully confident that someday we'll look back on this era of pornography and see it was ridiculous the way people spoke of it as sexual liberation, and I do think a time will come when it will be legislated away and it will be once again seen as something that's closeted and evil. But for now, it continues to be celebrated in our society and continues to be seen as a mark of liberation. And so we're fighting in our families against a lot of ugly messaging coming from outside the church. Let me give you a few critical facts about pornography that I think will be helpful to you as we think about this. And I don't often put a lot of stock in statistics. They're constantly changing, and you know enough to know the way you ask a question can really predict the outcome of the statistic you'll get at the end. But still, I think it's important to think about a few of these things. The first thing is to know is that exposure happens early in children's life. We've already covered this. The average age of first exposure to internet pornography, at least among boys, is now age 11. You talk to people, as I sometimes do, about when they were first and how they were first exposed to pornography. And it can be really, really heartbreaking how it happened. In so many cases, it was inadvertent, right? They were just perhaps curious about something or just looking for something else or doing something else, and then suddenly pornography barged into their lives. There's not a lot of really young children who are out looking for really vulgar and gross stuff. They just don't have the mind for it yet. And yet one of the realities of life in this world is it's a lot harder to avoid pornography than to find it, right? When if you're my age or older, when you grew up, it was hard to encounter pornography. It required work, it required effort, it required risk to get a hold of pornography. It required money to get a hold of pornography. Today, all of that is flipped. So today we have to put money into preventing ourselves from seeing pornography. We have to put a lot of effort into keeping it at bay. You talk to people about how and when they first encountered it, and the common theme is it was too soon. Today, 22% of all pornography is consumed by people who are under the age of 18, and much of that is consumed by people who are 10 or younger. And to be clear, if you're the older demographic, the kind of pornography that people are seeing today, that children are seeing today, it isn't the kind of stuff that was in the magazines that you may have seen when you were a similar age. This is really vile, degrading, violent, hardcore types of pornography, the likes of which Christians really can't even speak about it. So it's so vile and base. So exposure happens early, and it's really barging into children's life before parents usually have had good conversations with them, before we started to teach our children what's true and what's right and what honors and glorifies God. They're seeing this. 93% of boys and 62% of girls are exposed to pornography during their adolescent years. And again, that's not just nudie pics of days gone by, but video, high-definition video of acts of real violence and exploitation. So 93% of boys, I suspect that's actually low, and 62% of girls. 4.6 billion hours of pornography were consumed last year on just one website, the most popular website for porn out there. 4.6 billion hours of pornography were consumed on just one site. And of course, there are literally millions and millions of sites. So the sheer quantity of it really defies our minds. We can't even wrap our minds around just how much is being consumed. So exposure happens early. Exposure happens often. Once people begin to access pornography, they tend to look at it a lot. 57% of young adults admit that at least once per month they're actively seeking it out. And half of young adults say that all of their friends or most of their friends are looking at pornography on a regular basis. So it's not like you see it once and it just kind of goes away. I mean, for some people that's it. They see it once and have no interest in it. But for many, many people, more than half of people anyways, they see it, they're intrigued by it, and it becomes a pattern. Happens early, happens often. It also happens everywhere. An author who writes often about pornography says, "It seems so obvious if we invent a machine, the very first thing we're going to do after using it to make a profit is to use it to consume pornography." That's just the story of humanity, right? And recently we invented the mobile phone, and of course what happened very quickly, we migrated there. So like I said earlier, nearly 70% of porn today is viewed on mobile devices. So what that means is that pornography has become ultra mobile. Wherever you go, it can come with you. Whatever privacy you have, it's available to you there. 1 out of every 5 searches on a mobile device is a search for pornography. So all across the world, billions and billions of searches every day going on through mobile devices. 1 out of every 5 of them is somebody using that device to search for pornography. 62% of teens and young adults have received a sexually explicit message, what they call sexting. 41% of teens and young adults have actually sent one. And as you look at the statistics there, women are far more likely to be sending them than men. And it's really considered a right of sort of, it first was a right of dating, that as in our dating relationship, as our relationship becomes sexual, we'll start to exchange those messages. Now it's considered pre-dating. So if you want to date me, you'll have to send me this kind of thing. And you read about teens who send those messages to a girl who sends it to a boy, and he spreads it across the school. And there's a case in our area not too long ago of a girl who killed herself after that, young girl killed herself after that message got spread around the school. And what's considered liberating, I have to do this, the boy wants this, suddenly becomes ground for mockery and bullying. So you just think about that. 62% of teens and young adults have received a message. 41% have sent that. Think about, nothing ever gets erased anymore, right? Like everything's out there. So you think about all these kids growing up and thinking back into their past about those sexually explicit images of themselves that are out there somewhere. Now, most of them will never be found, never be recovered, never be seen. But a lot of people are leaving this big, long digital trail of themselves behind in the world that may someday crop up again. The consequences of that kind of thing, you think about someone who's in ministry, and then one day photos that he took when he was 13 or 14 suddenly are brought to light. What do you do with that? How does a church respond to that? There could be some very difficult, very interesting, tough things we as Christians have to work out as time goes on, as people leave this long trail behind them. Exposure changes people. 50% of Christian men say they consider themselves addicted to pornography. Think about that. 50% of Christian men would say, I'm addicted. It doesn't mean 50% are actually looking, just they consider themselves at the point of being addicted to it. And 20% of Christian women would now say they have some sort of addictive like of pornography. We know now that pornography actually rewires our brains. I mean, that sounds very scary. Lots of things in life rewire our brains, but pornography changes the way we behave. It does become addictive. It does become habitual, as so many other things do. It engages those pleasure centers in the brain in such a way that we do go back to it compulsively. So even when, in a sense, we don't want to, we find ourselves going back to it because of what's happened within our brains. 36% of young adults are accessing porn in order to learn about sexuality, and then it rises to 38% once we get into the 20 to 30 type phase. So people are seeing it as educational, which should be very, very concerning to parents, very, very concerning to pastors. People are going online to people who peddle in professional smut and looking to them for tips on sexuality. What is it all about? How do we go about this act, etc.? They're going to the most violent, most misogynistic stuff in the world and learning from that. So they're using that as their teachers. As I said earlier, we train our children. We don't tell our children this, but over time we model it to them. When you have questions, you go online looking for answers. Right? If you don't know something, you Google it. You ask Alexa. You do whatever. And so naturally then children will go online to find answers to their questions. And with a very visual generation, what would we do without YouTube? How would we learn anything without YouTube anymore, right? You want to learn how to change the oil in your car. You're not going to go to buy a book. You're not going to go to the library like you might have a generation ago. You go on YouTube and you watch a video, and you need to fix your toilet, if you need to, all these things, we go on and we watch YouTube videos, and it's hugely instructional. It's helpful. But our children are doing the same thing. Young adults and adults are doing the same thing. When they want to learn about sexuality, they're going out, they're finding essentially video tutorials, and then acting that out on one another. Very concerning, very scary if you pause to think about it. Exposure causes shame. We know we're experiencing shame by the way we react to a situation, right? Adam and Eve felt shame for their sin when they ran and hid from God, right? They're hiding. Hiding from God was a sign of the shame that they felt. People who look at porn feel shame. And so 71% of teens have done something to hide what they've done from their parents. 71% of teens have done something on their computers they felt enough shame about that they've then hidden that from their parents. Husbands are hiding things from their wives. Wives are hiding things from their husbands. You think about the phenomenon of 50 Shades of Grey, right, which is essentially pornographic material written in literary form for women. That only was successful because it was released on Kindle, where people could discreetly buy it. They didn't have to go to a bookstore, and later that happened, but they didn't have to go to a bookstore and stand in line. It was a success because of the discretion that was involved in actually purchasing it. There was shame, and so people were hiding it from one another until it became accepted enough that you'd actually get your girlfriends together and go to a theater and watch a movie of it. But it thrived in the dark, in shame. I don't know, I put all that every time I do a presentation like this. I just think, this is serious stuff, right? I mean, no wonder that we're pausing to think about it. No wonder we as parents are afraid of the challenge. We're afraid of what our kids could encounter. And I think that fear is good. I think we ought to let that fear to motivate us. But I really do want us to take heart. I want you to be encouraged. There is hope. God is good. God is forgiving. God is so eager to forgive us for past transgressions, whether that's people who have looked at pornography or parents who have just not been careful in helping our children through these things. God is making all things new. God is forgiving. God is able to reform, reshape our minds. The very same plasticity of the brain that allows us to form those habits can be used to deform those habits, to form new and better habits, right? God is making all things new. So we can deal with this. This is not an insurmountable challenge. One of the things I tried to show yesterday was that even in the world of the early church, there were really systemic, terrible problems happening around the Christians. And they were able to deal with it. They were able to overcome those challenges, all the pressure of society that it was bringing on them in regard to their sexuality. Christians were able to fight against that and to overcome it. And we can too. But if you're going to, you need a plan. You really do. You can't just raise your kids in the way you were raised. You can't just go about 20th century version of parenting and expect that your children will thrive. Pornography is too powerful, and it's too alluring, and it's too available for most people to avoid it. Unless you put together a plan, you will fail. It seems all but inevitable. You've just got to plan your way around this. Now, I think a good plan has to have at least 3 big goals. This is so important. You need to know what your goals are so you can plan accordingly. Now, we're going to get into some nitty-gritty here. I want to say the book at the back called The Next Story, Life and Faith. There's a new subtitle for it in this version. But the second to last chapter, I think chapter 10, is a lot of this material. So I'm going to go over this stuff quickly. You might find it really helpful to pick up that book and just read through that chapter. And this will really help you move through this plan and lay it out for you. 3 big goals. The first goal is to train. You need to teach and train your children to use the internet and to use their new devices responsibly. Right? You can't just take all these things away from your children. You can't just deny them all of these things. You can't just keep your kids offline until they're ready to go to college and then just kick them out of the house and trust that they'll do okay, right? This is part of your parenting now, is to admit this is the world we live in, whether we like it or not, whether we want it or not. This is the world we're in, so it falls to us as parents to teach our children, to train our children to use these things well, to use them responsibly. All right, if your kids are leaving the house at the end of your parenting, going off to college, and they don't know how to use these things responsibly, that's a parenting fail, right? It falls to you. The second goal is to guard our children from seeing or experiencing those things they don't even know exist, right? What I mean is the innocent ought to remain innocent. We don't want our children to be unintentionally exposed to pornography or to dangerous situations before parents have been able to teach and train them. The amount of pornography out there, there will come a time when children are exposed to it or adults are exposed to it. It's just going to happen in all likelihood. Just statistically, the sheer volume of it and the way it's coming after us. I mean, pornographers out there are identifying young boys through their habits and doing all they can to get those ads in front of their eyeballs. They're doing all they can to get our children addicted to pornography. Chances are our children will see it at some time. So what we need to do is guard them as much as we can, hold that stuff at bay. As long as our children are innocent, we want them to remain innocent. The third goal is prevention, to prevent our children from seeing or experiencing what they might want to see, what they might want to experience after they learn it exists. See the difference between the two? The first is these kids don't even know this stuff exists yet. I want it to stay that way as long as possible so they don't develop an interest in it. But at some point, it may be that your kids do have an interest in it. They are going out and looking for that stuff. Now we want to prevent that. We want to prevent them from seeing that stuff. Just statistically, once children, especially boys, are really exposed to that stuff, it does become increasingly intriguing to them. They do chase after it, and it falls to us as parents to guard them or to prevent that. There's one great danger we need to talk about before we get into the plan, and it's this. Beware of the plan that accounts for the children but neglects the parents. Dad, you can't help your kids if you yourself are looking at porn. Mom, you can't help your kids if you've got 50 Shades of Grey and the stuffed away somewhere, right? Like, we as parents have to be leading the way. That was part of the point yesterday. We have to have godly convictions. We have to have godly character so we can model that to our children without hypocrisy, right? I can't tell you how many people I've encountered whose exposure to pornography was when they found Dad's stash, right? When they went online and found this trail that Dad had inadvertently left behind. I mean, what does that do to a child to realize that about Dad? How does God regard that when Dad has left the stuff behind that now gets the son or gets the daughter intrigued? So we've got to be so aware of our hypocrisy here. We can hold out all these standards for our children while we ourselves are denying that. All right, let's talk about the porn-free family plan, this plan that will train our children, guard them from things while they're young and innocent, and then prevent them from seeing things if and when they become intrigued by them. Now, when technology causes a problem, and in some ways that's what happens here, right? All these new technologies have brought pornography into our homes in a new way. When technology causes a problem, we tend to want technology to solve the problem. But really, technology hasn't caused this problem, right? It's the human heart that has caused this problem. There wouldn't be a problem if there wasn't evil within us. There would be no porn if it wasn't for lustful hearts. So what we need is not just to go out and find technologies that will solve our problem. We need to develop character as well. We need a plan that relies on technology plus the development of godly character. So this plan uses technology to try and hold off temptation, to hold back temptation while we are helping our children develop in character. And this is where so many plans go wrong. So often we put things in place that all they do is prevent. Right? We just hold stuff back, and then we send our kids off to college. And all they've ever known is prevention. We haven't trained them in godly character. We haven't led them to develop godliness. And so they go off to college, and suddenly they're exposed to this stuff. The prevention no longer works. They're exposed to it, and they fall right into it. And then I come to the college to lead a chapel, and they're coming up to me and asking me what to do now that they're shamefaced and they're terrified because now they're addicted to this and they don't really know what to do about it. We cannot neglect our children's character. Okay, if you're going to get covenant eyes and all this stuff and put it in place, that's good. But all that has a purpose. The purpose is to hold things off so you can help your children grow in character. So this plan has 4 parts. I'll go over them briefly and then a little bit more thoroughly. Part 1, plan. You need to plan out your plan. Second, you need to prepare. There's some preparatory work involved in putting this plan in place. Then you need to meet. You need to meet as a family to discuss things, to talk about what you've done and why, and then you need to monitor. This is the part nobody likes, but over time you've got to monitor what's going on in your home. So plan, prepare, meet, and monitor. I'll go over them briefly. Again, there's a book at the back, mere $9. It lays out this in much more detail, and just so you can have it in front of you as you do it. So planning. A plan needs to account for 3 different kinds of technological device. Fixed devices, those ones that just sit there and never go anywhere. Mobile devices, things that can be used anywhere in the home, and then, or outside of the home, and then other people's devices, right? So you've got these devices like the family computer. Maybe you have one of those that different people share. It just sits on a desk in the home. You need to account for that, and that's relatively simple. And then you have cell phones. Your kid has a mobile phone that they can use in the home, they can use outside the home. They can attach to your family's Wi-Fi, or they can attach to the cell tower. That's a different kind of challenge. And then there's the other devices, the one that your child's friend has in their hand. You need to account for that too, right? If you help your kid know how to use their own devices, but then somebody comes up to them and says, hey, look at this, your children need to know how to deal with that. The way to start then is to inventory your home. See, what devices do we actually have in this home that could be used to look at pornography, that could be used to do bad stuff online? So that's computers, and that's laptops, and that's mobile phones, and that's iPads, and that's iPods, and that's Kindles, and there's so many different devices. I think if you spent time just rummaging through your house and looking at everything, counting it up, you might find you've got 10, 20, 30 different devices. I've had people bring me, some young men who are just like, I can't deal with this anymore. I need all these devices out of my home. So they bring me their phone, and they bring me their laptop, and they bring me their iPad, and it's all sitting in my closet at home. And he comes the next day, and he's like, I looked at porn on my PlayStation. It's like there's so many different devices we have that can be used in a moment of desperation, a moment of addiction. There's so many different devices we have that can be used to look at that. So you've got to inventory and figure out what in your home can be used in that way. Then you need to think about budget, just briefly. Are you willing to put a little bit of money into this? Is it worth it to spend a bit of money? You probably need to budget maybe $20 or $25 a month, which I think most families ought to be able to handle if you're going to bring all this stuff into your house. $20, $25 a month just to get some good tools that will help you. Then you need to learn about some of the different tools that are available to you. Broadly, there's 4 different things that I recommend. The first is what's called filtering. What filtering does is it proactively detects and blocks websites that might contain objectionable content. Right? So a filter stands between your home and the world. It's like any other kind of filter. It stands between 2 things, and it says this can come in, this cannot come in. Right? So child's trying to access Disney, no problem, I'll allow that. Child's trying to access pornography, it says, no, I'm not allowing that through. It serves as a filter. Second kind of software second kind of tool is accountability. Accountability isn't proactive, it's more reactive. It just keeps a trail of all that people have done, and it gathers a report and it sends it to someone else. You've probably heard of covenant eyes. That's roughly how it works. Here's all the things you've done last week, I'm sending a report to Dad. Here's all the things you did in the last 3 days, I'm sending a report to your friend or to your accountability partner. Right? So filtering is proactive, accountability is more reactive. It just tracks things. Third option, or third tool, is parental controls. The more our devices develop, the more manufacturers have been building certain parental controls into them, so parents can set a password on their child's phone that will allow or deny certain functionalities of that phone. And then the fourth one is communication. Again, we tend to believe that problems with technology are solved by technologies, but really it's a matter of the human heart. And so in all that we do, we can't neglect communication with our kids, talking to them, asking them good questions, asking if they're able to do the things they need to do online, asking if they're being tempted by things online. How are you using this phone? What apps are you using and why? For recommendations for filtering, there's something called Open DNS, which is, you can get it for free or spend $20 a year, and it just is a filter that stands between your home and the world. It's pretty good, just as a basic measure of keeping some of the worst stuff at bay. Accountability, I really believe in covenant eyes. I think it's very helpful, especially for older children. You probably don't need it for your preschoolers or kids who are just doing basic stuff online. But as your kids grow up a little bit and you want to keep a closer eye on what they're actually doing, what they're searching for, especially if your kids are starting into bad stuff or showing interest in it, it's very helpful for gathering all of that. Parental controls, they're on your kids' phones, on their devices. Chances are you can just activate those, and you'll find that helpful. And then communication. Again, I'm going to keep coming back to this. This is the most indispensable one of all, communicating with your kids, not just trusting in technology to do the job, but communicating with them, talking to them, asking them good questions, giving them the freedom to come to you when they're having struggles, promising that if they come to you and admit that they're struggling in some way, you're not going to freak out or shame them or anything. You'll talk with them and work with them and help them. Lots of communication. Decide. Got a few decisions to make as parents, don't you? Will you allow children to access the internet through mobile devices? So, maybe for Christmas, grandparents give your kids some sort of a little tablet device. All right? Will you allow them to access the internet on that device? Or do you want them to use only, say, the family computer to access the internet? Maybe they can play games or read books on that. But when it comes to actually surfing the web, you want them to use only one device. It's the kind of decision you need to make. What's the earliest age you'll allow your child to have their own device? And I guarantee it'll differ between the first kid and the last kid in your family. Who has authority over your children's devices? Is that device owned by your child, or is it owned by you? Do they have the right over it, or do you as the parent? Are they kind of using it with your permission, or are you sometimes going to ask their permission to access it, to see what they've been doing? Will you allow your children to use all of their devices wherever they want, or are you going to keep them in certain areas? If you're going to look at this stuff, you've got to use it in a central place in the home. When will they get their Facebook account? Will you let your child use Instagram, Snapchat? And there's all these different things. They're changing, moving all the time. These are the decisions you need to think about, decisions you need to make. In general, I recommend that as few devices as necessary have access to the internet, so you can sort of filter things through fewer devices rather than more. In general, I would say don't allow young children to have internet access on mobile devices. So if your child has an iPod Touch and your child is 8 or 9, that can be a great device for certain functions, but probably turn off the browser on that. They probably don't need that. If they need to browse, maybe they can use another computer where you can keep closer tabs on it. And then discuss, before you actually implement a plan, it's probably good to talk to your family and just talk about some of these things, right? Talk about dangers. And depending on the age of your children, you can talk about this in different ways, but there's yucky stuff out there I don't want you to see, all the way to older kids. You're talking more specifically about what's out there and how you want to protect your children from it. But at the end of it all, your children in their natural human hearts will want to be able to use those things to do whatever it is they want, and they'll feel that you're encroaching on their rights to hold back any of the functionality. You as a parent will be tempted to just want to throw all those things away and have their kids not use them at all. And so talking, meeting there, discussing these things, what you're hoping to accomplish, and how you're doing this as best as you can out of love for your children is very important. So planning, spend an afternoon just thinking about these things, inventorying what you've got, talking to your husband, talking to your wife, talking to your kids. Plan it out, and then you need to prepare. You need to prepare everything. This is yucky stuff. Nobody wants to do this kind of stuff, but you just need to. It's like my wife and I just had to do our wills again, right? Like, who wants to sit down and talk about who's going to get your kids and where your money's going to go and what they can do with your organs and all this stuff? But is it ever a gift to whoever survives you, right? At the end of it all. Nobody wants to do this stuff. There's a lot of stuff in life we don't want to do. We just have to do because it's the right thing to do. And this is kind of this stuff. This is where we're going from theory to practice. You need to think about passwords. You need to have a password that your kids don't know so you can lock down certain stuff, certain functionality, right? I mean, so many people set a password and then they tell their kids what the password is. Well, that just kind of blows up the whole system, right? You've got to have a password. Not only that, but everyone in your family needs to know the importance of having good passwords that only they know. You got to plan when you're at your best and when your kids are at their best for what will happen when they're at their worst. So you got to help your kids come up with passwords and see the importance of that. That's something that'll do them well through life. You need to create accounts. If you're going to use OpenDNS, you got to go to the site and create an account and pop your credit card in if you want some of the more advanced functionality. You're going to install Covenant Eyes on your computers, especially for older kids. Then you need to go and create an account. You need to go and get the software and install it on all these computers. OpenDNS, you need to activate it on the router in your home. You need to go to each computer and install Covenant Eyes on it. This can take some time. Like, get yourself a cup of coffee, realize your afternoon is going to be wasted. There's going to be a whole lot of restarting computers and updating Windows and all this kind of stuff. And just do it. Basically, anything with a screen, you've got to in some way account for that device. And I really mean that. I mean, I can't tell you how many people I've interacted with who have just realized how pathetic they are, how deep they're into their sin when they're roaming around the house just looking desperately for anything that they can use to get their little fix. Go to those devices and apply parental controls. Turn off that web browsing on some of those mobile devices. Turn off the ability to buy new apps or to install new apps without you popping in a password or at least taking a look. Turn off the ability for your children to change their own password on their devices. Consider turning off something like Facebook. A lot of parents don't know this. If your kids are using the Facebook app on their iPhone, there's a browser built into Facebook that bypasses the browser. You can turn off the browser on their iPhone, but if they're using Facebook, they can browse that way. You need to be aware of this kind of stuff. Think about the cameras that our kids have, right? Most of these devices now have a camera, and our kids are being trained to take lots and lots of photos. So consider the power you're giving your kids, even very young kids. You're giving them a camera and an internet connection and access to the world. How easy it is for people to take advantage of that functionality with kids. I don't know if you saw not too long ago Mark Zuckerberg's, that founder of Facebook, sitting in his office with a little thing over top of the camera on his computer. You know, there's been this conspiracy theory forever that people can actually hack your computer and gain access to your camera. I think that was given a lot of credence when the founder of Facebook was shown with something physically blocking the camera on his computer. There's a lot of weird stuff going on in the world as these technologies mature and develop and we start to realize some of the functionalities. We've got to be really careful about giving our little children cameras and internet connections. Right, so you've planned. You've sort of gained an idea of here's what we want to do as a family. Here's our strategy when it comes to all of this stuff. We've prepared. We know what software we're using. We've installed stuff all over the place, ruined an afternoon installing software and coming up with good passwords, all of that. Good, now it's time to meet. Got to talk to your family, talk to your kids about what you've done. Now, when I did this in my home years ago now, I did all this and I set it all in place, and I kind of figured my family would be like, yay, Dad loves us. Like, look what he's done. The reality was a little bit more like that, right? Because I had invaded their comfort. It's not one of my kids was interested in porn. Really, I don't even think at that time they really knew that it existed. So it wasn't that. It's just that first I had shown a lack of trust, a lack of confidence in them. That I was saying, I need to stand between you and the world. And there's some things you think you ought to be doing that I'm saying, no, you shouldn't be doing that. Some things you want to do, I'm saying, not now. Even just the reality of going from a family that never uses passwords to a family that needs to put in passwords, that can be annoying. The reality, I was saying, I'm going to be looking at your iPod sometimes. And as you're sending messages back and forth with your friends, I might take a look every now and then just to see what you're saying, to see what you're doing online. And everything you do in this house is now leaving a little trail behind. And I'm going to be looking at that from time to time just to say, what have you been doing? And I'm doing all this not because I hate you or distrust you in any special way. I'm concerned for you. I believe this is the right thing for me to be doing as a father. So we had to meet. So we did this little family meeting, and I explained my concern. And I told them, don't expect privacy on your devices. You can use it, but Mom and Dad, we know your password, and we will jump on from time to time. I'm monitoring you, and you need to know how to use your passwords. And I told them I love you guys, and I want you to come to us if you're struggling, if you've seen something, or even if you've been going out and looking for things, come and talk to us. I told them as well that Mom and Dad were using the same standards, that we were putting this stuff in place too. We weren't going to hold ourselves to some elevated standard or our kids to an elevated standard and us to a lesser one. We are going to use these tools too because we don't have anything to hide. And then even more importantly is this discipleship component, these ongoing meetings with kids, talking to them about this stuff. So one of the things I implemented years ago, and this has gotten harder as time has gone on and kids get jobs and get involved in more things, but it's just taking my kids out for breakfast on a Saturday morning. Find a cheap breakfast place, take your kids out one by one, rotate through them, and just sit and chat for half an hour or an hour as you eat a bad breakfast together, you know? Are you struggling? Are there any struggles that are coming through your devices? You know, are you able to do what you need to do? Are you able to use the things you need to use? Have you seen anything that we ought to talk about? See, this is so important because this is where you're helping them develop the character that will really, really sustain them. Ultimately, what you want is that if all of these blocks go away and, you know, my son's 18. I told him when he turned 18, I said, I will not stop you now from uninstalling Covenant Eyes. If you want to take that off, you're your own person now. You're an adult. At some point, I want to step back from that stuff. He's chosen to keep it. That's fine. But that's what we want, right? Is to get our children to this point where we can step back now and say, you're doing all right. And now you start to make the decision. What we want is to give our kids little ability with their devices. And as they prove themselves, then we give them more, right? So we start by giving them a very, very powerful device with very few capabilities. We've removed most of them. And as they prove themselves, then we give them more. They prove themselves again, we give them more. If they blow it, then we start taking things away, right? We say, you can't handle that camera, you can't handle that internet access. Fine, we'll take those things away. What we really want is for our kids to prove themselves over time. So there's really a sense in that all of that software, all of those technological things, it's all meant to support this, which is speaking to our kids, training our kids, helping them grow in godly character. Keeping porn at bay so they can develop. We said it yesterday, right? Porn, sexual sin of all kinds, stunts spiritual growth. We're holding that away so our kids can grow. So they're not dealing with that addiction. They're not dealing with the guilt and the shame and just all the consequences that come with pursuing sin. Really, to some degree, I think you're giving them law that will expose their desire to break the law. Right? You're just showing them in their human heart where there's law. Your humanity, your sinful humanity has this desire then to break the law. And so you can show them grace. You can show them, point them to the gospel. You're blocking access to so much, so they're not giving their younger years to smut. I've just met so many people who really that was the story. That was their biography for those younger years, was just full out addiction, compulsion to smut and nonsense. You're taking that away so you can teach and train them so they can give those years to something much nobler. So you plan, you prepare, you meet, and then you've got to monitor. This is the ongoing thing. Those other things you kind of do one time, right? The meetings are ongoing, but monitoring. It's one thing you have this moment of great motivation and you set up this whole system. That's great. But any system needs to be maintained. And I think this is where a lot of us go wrong. We set it up, we think it's going to sustain itself forever. It's not a perpetual motion machine, right? You need to keep going back to it. And so you got to read those accountability reports that come in, and I hate that. I get a bunch of them from different guys in the church, and I just hate on a Saturday morning all these accountability reports, having to filter through and see what people have been doing and make sure they haven't been doing bad stuff. But I mean, that's what it takes, and if that's helpful to people, I'll do that. Thankfully, over time, the reports are getting better and clearer with identifying the few things you need to know about and the lots of things you don't. From time to time, this means jumping onto your kid's phone and seeing what they're chatting about and who they're talking with and stuff like that. You need to adjust. As your kids get older, you need to adjust, right? You got to be careful that you're not treating teens as infants here. As they prove themselves trustworthy, praise them and give them greater access. If they're falling into temptation again, or falling into sin, then maybe take some stuff away, but you need to continually adjust this. You need to maintain it. From time to time, the software needs to be updated, or they get a new phone, you need to reinstall this stuff. There's a lot of maintenance that comes with it, and where a lot of things fail is in not maintaining the system. So, as I said before, this is stuff nobody else has really had to deal with in the past. We're the first generation to have to raise children in this world, first generation to have to help children use these devices, to first generation to have to decide when to buy teenagers or help teenagers buy their first phone. First generation to have to think about what does it mean for a 13-year-old to be part of a social network that can connect them to 2 billion other people. And in a moment, somebody that age can say something that will go out to everybody. Nobody's really had to deal with that before. Nobody else has had to think about Snapchat and what does it mean to have little video messages or photo messages that will exist for a very, very short period of time and then be gone. This is us. We have to think these things through. We have to help our kids live well in this world. We can only do that if we plan, if we come up with a porn-free family plan. It takes hours of work to set it up, requires some maintenance. Let me tell you, it's time well invested. And, at this point in parenting, like I said, we've got an 18, 15, 12-year-old. It's worked, I think. I think it's accomplished what we wanted to accomplish. It's held bad stuff at bay as far as I can tell. And I know kids can be deceptive and all of that, but from what we've observed, from what we've seen, it's holding bad stuff at bay, and we're talking to our kids, we're communicating with them, helping them become aware in the age-appropriate ways of what's out there and how to deal with it. And it's working. There's one device that's come along fairly recently I want to tell you about called Circle. You can buy it at Best Buy. It's $100, money well spent. This is an ideal device for younger families, and then keep it around for older families as well. Just as your kids get older, you need to supplement it a little bit. But it's not created by Disney. They just did a partnership with Disney. Great devices to put in your home. It attaches to your router. All the traffic in your home will go through it. You can create accounts for each person and then just decide, here's what they can see at their age. Here's age-appropriate stuff for them. If anything's worth $100, this thing is. Very, very helpful device. I've been able to talk to the founders of it a little bit and really believe in what they're doing. $100 at Best Buy. Do consider it or something like it. As time goes on, we're getting more and more tools like this as people are identifying the problems. But again, don't put your confidence in technology. Ultimately, continue to talk to your children, continue to raise your children, continue to have those discussions with them. Use stuff like this to hold the bad stuff at bay. Porn-Free Family, if you want more about it, there is that book at the back called The Next Story, which lays it out. You can also go here. That will give you some links. There might even be a worksheet there. I'm not sure if there is, to help you work through some of this stuff.